In the silent, frozen depths of space, billions of light years from the fragile warmth of Earth, a chilling impossibility is looking back at us. The James Webb Space Telescope, humanity's most powerful eye, has pierced the veil of cosmic dawn, gazing further into the abyss than any instrument ever built. And what it has uncovered defies the very foundations of physics we held as absolute truth. We have found ancient structures that should not exist, whispers from worlds that have no sun, and an anomaly so profound it suggests the universe itself might be a conscious, thinking entity. If you are ready to question the nature of reality itself, hit that like button, because the discoveries I am about to reveal will forever alter your perception of the cosmos. Prepare yourselves. The journey into the abyss begins now. We thought we understood the darkness between the stars. We called it empty, a void filled with nothing but cold, distance, and time. For generations, our telescopes scanned this blackness, cataloguing the islands of light we call galaxies, but always assuming the space between them was simply space, a passive stage on which the cosmic drama unfolds. Webb has shown us this is a profound and dangerous misunderstanding. The darkness is not empty, it is listening. The investigation began with a survey of what astronomers call rogue planets or orphan worlds. These are planets that do not orbit a star. They were violently ejected from their home systems billions of years ago, doomed to wander the infinite night of interstellar space alone. We've known they exist for years, but Webb's infrared sensitivity allowed us to see them in unprecedented numbers, hundreds of them, dark, cold Jupiters and super-Earths adrift in the eternal cold. Initially, the goal was simple: to study their composition and temperature, to understand how a world survives without the life-giving energy of a parent star. Dr. Aris Thorne of the European Space Agency was leading the survey. His team was analyzing the faint infrared glow emitted by these planets, the last residual heat from their formation. But they found something else, something buried deep in the signal. It was a fluctuation, a tiny, almost imperceptible modulation in the background radiation surrounding these rogue worlds. It was not a radio signal. It wasn't light. It was, for lack of a better word, a vibration. A tremor in the very fabric of space-time itself. At first, we were certain it was an instrument error, Dr. Thorne stated in a leaked internal memo. The data suggested that space-time around these planets was scarred, as if their violent ejection from their solar systems had ripped a permanent wound in reality. Imagine throwing a stone into a perfectly still lake. The ripples eventually fade and the lake becomes calm again. But what Webb was seeing was as if the ripples from a stone thrown billions of years ago were still there, frozen in place. Each rogue planet was a source of a persistent, localized space-time disturbance, a silent, unending scream that echoed not through space, but as space. This discovery alone was enough to send shockwaves through the physics community. It violated the principles of general relativity. Space-time can be bent and warped by mass, but it should not be able to be permanently torn or scarred in this way. It suggested a form of cosmic memory, that the universe remembers traumatic events on a fundamental physical level. But this was only the beginning of the nightmare. As Webb observed more of these orphan worlds, the team's software began to build a three-dimensional map of these space-time scars, and a terrifying pattern emerged. The scars were not identical. They varied in intensity, frequency, and structure. They were complex, almost like fingerprints. Each world carried the unique signature of its own violent birth and exile. But there was more. The scars seemed to be faintly interacting with each other. Across hundreds of light years, these space-time wounds were resonating, like tuning forks vibrating in sympathy. A disturbance around one rogue planet would subtly influence the structure of a scar around another, light years away. The darkness was not silent. It was a web of ancient trauma, a network of cosmic pain connecting these lost worlds. What force could possibly link them? What medium could carry this impossible influence across the void? Scientists had no answers. It was as if the universe itself had a nervous system, and these lost worlds were its phantom limbs, still aching long after being severed. While Dr. Thorne's team grappled with the implications of these space-time echoes, another team, pointing Webb at a completely different target, made a discovery that would provide a terrifying new context. This team was studying pulsars, the hyperdense, rapidly spinning corpses of massive stars. Specifically, they were observing a pulsar designated PSR B1957-20, also known as the Black Widow pulsar. This pulsar is infamous for its cruelty. It is steadily devouring its smaller companion star, blasting it with a wind of high-energy radiation and stripping it away layer by layer. But it wasn't the pulsar or its dying companion that drew Webb's attention. It was a planet, a lone gas giant orbiting the chaotic duo at a great distance, a world that should not exist. The intense radiation from a pulsar should make planet formation impossible. Any gas or dust would have been blown away billions of years ago. This planet, designated B1957-20b, was a complete enigma. Was it a captured wanderer, a rogue planet that strayed too close and was trapped by the pulsar's immense gravity? Webb was tasked with analyzing its atmosphere to find clues to its origin. What it found would shatter our understanding of matter itself. The spectrograph data came back, and it was wrong. It had to be. The software flagged it as corrupted data. They ran the observation again. The same result, and again, the same result. The atmosphere of B1957-20b was filled with spectral lines that did not correspond to any known element in the universe. Let me explain how utterly impossible this is. Every element gives off a unique signature of light, a chemical fingerprint. We have mapped the fingerprints of every element on the periodic table, from hydrogen to oganesson. The signals coming from this planet's atmosphere did not match any of them. They were signatures of elements that, according to nuclear physics, cannot exist. Physicists have long theorized about an island of stability, a hypothetical region of super-heavy elements beyond the current periodic table that might not decay instantly, elements with atomic numbers like 120 or 126. But these would be incredibly unstable, lasting perhaps microseconds in a laboratory. The elements in this planet's atmosphere were stable, they were a permanent part of its chemistry, and they were far, far heavier than anything theorized. We were looking at the spectral lines of elements 200, 300, and beyond. Dr. Lena Petrova, the lead analyst on the project, described the feeling in the lab. It was like an archaeologist finding a working smartphone in a sealed Egyptian tomb. It's not just an anomaly, it's a paradox. It's evidence of a physics that does not belong in our universe. The implications were staggering. Natural processes, even in the heart of a supernova, cannot create these elements. The forces required are too extreme, the conditions too precise. To forge such matter would require technology so advanced it would be indistinguishable from magic. Was this planet an artificial construct, a cosmic factory, using the raw energy of the Black Widow pulsar to forge impossible materials? The idea was insane, but it was the only one that fit the data. Someone or something had built a forge of the gods, and it had been operating in our own cosmic backyard, completely undetected. The planet wasn't a planet, it was a machine. It was Dr. Thorne who made the connection. On a hunch, he cross-referenced the data from his rogue planet survey with the location of the Black Widow pulsar. The results turned his blood to ice. The space-time scars around the rogue planets were not random. The vibrations were strongest and most complex on the rogues that were located on the same galactic plane as the pulsar system. And there was more. Using complex algorithms, his team filtered out the background noise and isolated the echoes from the rogue planets. They discovered the vibrations were not just a chaotic scream of pain. Buried deep within the complex wave patterns was a signal, a structured, repeating sequence. It was a language written not in light or sound, but in the very geometry of the universe. And the signal was being broadcast from the pulsar. The machine planet, B1957+22b, was not just forging impossible elements. The process was generating massive structured ripples in space-time. The rogue planets, with their own space-time scars, were acting like cosmic receivers, picking up this signal and resonating with it, rebroadcasting a fainter, distorted version of it across the galaxy. The network of trauma was not a network of trauma at all. It was an antenna array. For billions of years, a signal has been propagating across the Milky Way, completely invisible to us. It was carried not by the electromagnetic spectrum, but by the fabric of reality itself. We were deaf to it until Webb gave us the ability to see these space-time defects. We had stumbled into a conversation that was older than humanity itself. What is the purpose of this galactic-scale network? Why build a machine to forge impossible elements and broadcast a signal through the very structure of space-time? The most terrifying discovery was yet to come. The team began to analyze the structure of the signal itself. It was not a message of greeting. It was not a beacon of discovery. The structure was mathematical, purely logical. It was a sequence of decreasing prime numbers, a countdown that has been running for potentially billions of years. A countdown that, based on their models, is nearing its end. The universe is not just strange. It is not just hiding secrets. It is an active process, a mechanism, and that mechanism is counting down to something. Webb has shown us that the silence of space is a lie. The darkness is full of echoes, machines, and a message that we can barely comprehend. A message that says, time is running out. And we are left with the ultimate, terrifying question. What happens when the countdown reaches zero? The revelation of the countdown sent a shockwave of silent, existential terror through the global scientific community. This was no longer astronomy. It was eschatology. The carefully constructed walls between physics, philosophy, and religion began to crumble. For weeks, the discovery was the most closely guarded secret in human history, discussed only in encrypted channels and secure video conferences between the world's leading minds. The question was no longer, are we alone? But is the universe itself against us? The data was undeniable. A signal, broadcast not through light but through the very medium of reality, was counting down. A machine of impossible physics orbiting a dead star was acting as its amplifier, and the lost, orphaned worlds scattered through the void were its choir. Humanity had spent centuries looking up at the stars, searching for meaning, only to discover a clock ticking down to an unknown and likely final event. The first task was to understand the clock itself. A team of mathematicians and astrophysicists was assembled in a digital clean room, tasked with analyzing the sequence. It was a simple, elegant series of decreasing prime numbers, but the interval between each tick of the countdown was not constant. When they plotted the sequence against cosmic time, they made a horrifying discovery. The countdown was accelerating. It's not linear, explained Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a lead chronologist on the secret project. The rate of the countdown appears to be tied to the universe's rate of expansion. As the expansion accelerates due to dark energy, the interval between the prime number ticks gets shorter. Think of it like a recording being played back faster and faster. The universe isn't just a clock, it's a fuse, and someone or something lit both ends. This finding erased any sense of detached academic curiosity. The end was not some abstract event in the cosmic deep future. Based on the current rate of acceleration, the models predicted the countdown would reach its final number not in billions or even millions of years. The projections, though hazy, pointed to a conclusion within a few thousand years. In the grand scheme of the cosmos, it was the blink of an eye. The final tick could happen in the lifetime of the pyramids or in the lifetime of our great-grandchildren. We were living in the final seconds of the cosmic clock. This new urgency forced a radical shift in thinking. If the signal was embedded in space-time itself, where else might they find its echo? If it was a fundamental property of the universe, it must have been present from the very beginning. A new team was tasked with the most ambitious data mining operation ever conceived. They would search for the countdown signature in the oldest light in the universe, the cosmic microwave background, or CMB. The CMB is the afterglow of the Big Bang, a faint uniform radiation that fills all of space. It is a baby picture of our universe, taken when it was just 380,000 years old. If the countdown was truly fundamental, its faint vibrations should be imprinted upon this ancient light, like a watermark on the canvas of creation. Using quantum computers to run staggeringly complex algorithms, they began to sift through the petabytes of CMB data collected over decades, looking for the ghost of the signal. For months, there was nothing. The signal was so faint, so alien, that it was almost perfectly hidden in the quantum noise of the early universe. But then they found it. A pattern of temperature fluctuations in the CMB so minuscule it had always been dismissed as statistical error. But it wasn't error. When they applied the prime number sequence as a decryption key, the noise resolved into a clear, unmistakable signal. It was there. The countdown was etched into the birth of the cosmos. The machine planet orbiting the Black Widow pulsar was not the source. The implications of this were almost too vast to comprehend. The countdown didn't begin with some alien intelligence. It began with the Big Bang. Our universe was born with a termination date. It was designed with a built-in, preset obsolescence. Every star that has ever shone, every planet that has ever formed, every life form that has ever existed, has done so on borrowed time, inside a system programmed to end. This discovery answered one question but opened a chasm of new, more terrifying ones. If the planet machine was not the source, then what was it? Why build a galactic-scale amplifier for a countdown that was already universal? Why create a forge to create impossible super-heavy elements? The teams of scientists, now working in a state of unified, feverish collaboration, turned their attention back to the forge and its bizarre, unnatural products. What was special about these stable, super-heavy elements? Under intense simulation, they began to reveal their properties. They were incredibly dense, of course, but their interaction with gravity was strange. They seemed to possess a kind of gravitational inertia, resisting the curvature of space-time in a way that no normal matter should. Dr. Lena Petrova's team built a model. What if an object were constructed of these elements? The simulation was chilling. An object made from these materials would effectively be a space-time shield. It would be immune to the warping of space. It could pass through the event horizon of a black hole unscathed. It could theoretically survive the crushing singularity itself. And if it could survive a black hole, it could likely survive anything. A new theory emerged, more unsettling and profound than any before it. The forge wasn't a clock, a weapon, or a monument. It was a lifeboat. Someone or something knows about the countdown. They have known for billions of years, and they have been working tirelessly to build a defense. They are using the raw power of a pulsar to manufacture the only materials in the universe capable of shielding against the countdown's final event. The signal amplification wasn't a warning to others. It was likely an industrial side effect of the forging process itself, a massive power draw on the fabric of reality. This was not an act of aggression. It was a desperate act of survival. Humanity was not the protagonist of this story. We were merely the mayflies, born on the last day of summer, oblivious to the coming winter. We were the insects crawling on the hull of a great ark, unaware of the flood that was coming to wash the world away. But this presented a new opportunity. If the forging process created the signal amplification, then the two were linked. The ticks of the countdown must correlate to specific events at the forge. Another team began to cross-reference the timing of the prime number ticks with other unexplained cosmic phenomena. They found a stunning correlation. Every tick, every time the countdown advanced to the next prime number, coincided precisely with the detection of a massive, seemingly random energy burst from the same quadrant of the sky, a fast radio burst, or FRB. We finally understood. The FRBs that had baffled astronomers for decades were not random. They were the exhaust flash from the forge, the momentary blast of energy as the machine completed another cycle, forging another batch of its impossible, reality-defying elements. And according to their calculations, the next tick was imminent. The next fast radio burst was due. For the first time, they could predict the countdown. A wave of frantic energy swept through every observatory on and off the planet. Every radio dish, every space telescope, every instrument capable of listening to the cosmos was retasked. They were all to be pointed at one single, insignificant-looking star system, the Black Widow pulsar. They would see what happens. They would witness the forging process in real time. Every eye of humanity and every instrument we had ever built was aimed at the forge, waiting to see what would be born from the universe's next dying breath. Every observatory, every radio telescope, every sensor on Earth and beyond was locked onto the Black Widow. As the predicted time for the next tick drew near, the collective pulse of humanity seemed to slow to the rhythm of the countdown. In the control rooms, screens filled with static and data flickered, reflecting the anxious faces of the world's greatest minds. When the moment arrived, there was no flash of gamma rays, no visible light, and no burst of radio noise recognizable as an FRB. Instead, what came was a shockwave. It wasn't an electromagnetic event confined to radio dishes. It was a ripple in reality itself. The gravitational waves generated by the forging process were so colossal that 8.1 minutes later, the exact time required for the signal to cross the vast distance, the sophisticated gravitational sensors positioned near Jupiter, the laser interferometers on the Moon, and even sensitive seismographs on Mars, all registered a microscopic yet undeniable shift in local space-time. It's not a flash, it's the sound of the universe being hit. Dr. Tanaka murmured, eyes glued to the oscillating graphs. The energy drain was so fundamental that it had momentarily stressed the space-time metric over light years. The event wasn't an explosion. It was an act of industrial violence against the fabric of reality. The computers instantly analyzed the aftermath. At the moment of the wave, the forge's gravitational signature momentarily changed. With every tick, the machine was measurably, mathematically heavier. A new, stable, super-heavy element had been created, and its mass was instantly integrated into the structure. They weren't just watching the forge operate, they were watching the arc expand. Each tick was a section of the lifeboat being welded into place. The architect's code, this terrifying confirmation that the forge was a functioning lifeboat, led to a radical pivot. If it was a machine, it had to have an interface. A newly assembled team, a blend of linguists, mathematicians, and information theorists, turned their focus to the background noise that constantly emanated from the pulsar system. This wasn't random static, it was structured radio data, previously filtered out as too regular to be a natural cosmic phenomenon. Dr. Alison Reed, a mathematical linguist from Cambridge, championed the theory. This was not a warning intended for us, but a user manual for the machine itself. The language of the engineers who built it. After weeks of algorithmic deep diving, Reed's programs isolated a continuously repeating sequence. It was not an alphabet, but a command loop, a set of instructions running on perpetual autopilot for billions of years. 101. Friction Trainier. Maintain stellar extraction rate. 100. Resonance. Tuned to space-time vibrations. So, set to defense, uстановка на защиту. Prepare final containment field. It was the maintenance code of a long-abandoned project. The forge is running autonomously, Reed declared to the stunned Security Council via video link. The engineers are not monitoring it. They left. They set a program to run until the very end, ensuring their creation would be ready when the countdown expires. Their work wasn't about escape, it was about preservation. The spherical void, the discovery of the set to defense command, drove Dr. Petrova's team to finalize their most terrifying model. What would happen when the arc was completed, when the mass of super-heavy elements reached its critical point, set to defense? The simulation was the most unsettling yet. When the forge reached maximum readiness, its unique architecture, composed of these gravitationally inert elements, would do more than just shield itself from external forces. It would fracture space-time. The model demonstrated that the forge, at the moment of completion, would generate a perfectly spherical void in space-time around itself. This would be no mere armor, it would be a gravitational discontinuity. It resembled a portal or a door that separated everything within its confines from the coming universal fuse. But why a door, and why did the engineers leave? The conclusion was staggering. They built not only the vessel, but the docking station for it, Tanaka revealed. They didn't expect the ark to fly away. They expected something to arrive and use it. They left behind not just a lifeboat. They left a legacy. The problem of the air. Now that humanity understood its role, not as the protagonist, but as an accidental archaeologist, a new existential crisis erupted. We were the latecomers to a cosmic tragedy. If the ark was built for others, for whom was it intended? If it was meant to be filled, then by whom? A desperate race against silence began. They had to decipher who the engineers were waiting for. Buried within their code, they found not just instructions, but a password, a final, decisive command that had to be input by the air to activate the final set to defense sequence. Tensions among global leaders and scientists reached a fever pitch. Every new detail about the forge only highlighted our impotence. We were insects crawling over an alien pre-sealed submarine. If we couldn't decipher this password, someone would arrive at an empty ark. And if that someone was the engineers themselves, returning after billions of years, or the heirs they intended, they would discover their lifeboat was unused. They would see that in the final moments of the universe's life, the rules they set were ignored. The question was no longer how to save ourselves. The question was, what will we tell those who come to claim their ark? And what will they do when they find us crawling over their inheritance? The discovery of the heir's password, the final elusive command that would seal the Ark and initiate the set to defense protocol, immediately transformed Project Sentinel from a scientific investigation into an international existential security crisis. Humanity was no longer merely racing against a cosmological clock, it was racing against an arrival. If the mysterious heir arrived before the password was deciphered, finding the Ark empty and unused, the consequences were utterly unknowable. The global project rapidly fractured into two crucial clandestine operations: the Cipher Team and the Policy Group. The Cipher Team, led by Dr. Alison Reed and Dr. Kenji Tanaka, sealed themselves within a hardened digital bunker beneath CERN. Their singular mandate: decode the engineer's language, unlock the password's continuous variables, and most crucially, determine who was meant to claim this staggering legacy. Initial frustration was immense. The engineer's code was not founded on simple mathematics or any known linguistic structure. It was composed of prime number triplets, sequences that seemed to reference fundamental physical constants, the speed of light, the mass of the proton, but with deliberate, unsettling deviations and an added arbitrary digit at the end. It's not just a numerical key, argued Dr. Reed, pointing to a sequence that perfectly matched the measured mass of the electron before being warped by a non-standard prime. It's a philosophical challenge. They aren't asking for a number we know, they're asking for an answer about their creation. The engineers had used the universe as their textbook, the fundamental constants of nature as their alphabet. To unlock the password, the team had to understand not just how the engineers calculated, but what they valued and what assumptions they held about the cosmos. Chaos in the waiting room. Meanwhile, the carefully managed information leak regarding the Ark, that the universe had a hard-coded expiration date, and that an alien species had merely left behind a lifeboat for an unspecified successor, shattered the fragile stability of the world. The revelation of humanity's cosmic insignificance ignited a violent mixture of religious fervor and absolute nihilism in cities worldwide. Governments, realizing their powerlessness on the galactic scale, descended into survivalist paralysis. Nations with space programs quietly accelerated their own, now likely futile, attempts to develop deep space vessels, hoping to reach the Ark before it was sealed, or, failing that, escape Earth before the final tick. The Policy Group, comprising the world's highest political, military, and corporate authorities, was consumed by one agonizing, unresolvable ethical conflict. Do we seize the password if we find it? If they entered the password, they could claim the Ark for humanity, but the code's final command, set to defense, implied sealing the structure shut, potentially trapping those inside or locking out the intended heir forever. This led to a desperate hours-long debate. Should humanity steal its way onto the Ark, abandoning the possibility of cooperation, or risk annihilation waiting for the true heir? The fate of the entire species rested on this impossible galactic-scale moral choice. The missing variable, the breakthrough, came from an unexpected source. Dr. Lena Sharma, a young, formerly marginalized astronomer who specialized in non-baryonic matter, the theoretical, unseen building blocks of dark matter. While analyzing the core of the Forge's construction code, she noticed a repeating prime number factor that Tanaka's team had consistently dismissed as noise. It didn't correspond to any known cosmic constant. It was an anomaly that seemed to exist outside of the standard model. Sharma's eyes widened as she connected the dots. She realized the engineers weren't referencing the physics of our universe. They were referencing the physics of the Ark itself. The number corresponded precisely to the predicted gravitational inertia of the super-heavy element, a property that was theoretical until the Forge began its work, and which was constantly changing as the Ark grew. "It's the signature of the material," Sharma announced in a breathless teleconference with the Policy Group. "The password isn't a fixed constant of our universe. It's the continuously variable constant of their survival." This was a seismic conceptual shift. The password was a complex, self-referencing equation whose final solution had to be the precise, measured gravitational inertia of the fully formed super-heavy element, a number that wouldn't be fixed until the Ark was almost complete. The engineers had designed the key to be dynamic, ensuring that only a civilization with continuous, intimate, and real-time knowledge of the Forge's construction status could ever successfully activate it. The double trap and the ward. However, the breakthrough revealed a far more terrifying catch. By incorporating the Ark's own variable physics into the activation key, the engineers had created a double lock with an even darker secondary function. The team discovered a final, crucial step hidden within the set to defense code. After successful activation, the Ark would emit a powerful, directional gravitational beacon. This was not merely a defense protocol, it was a homing signal, a final, irresistible call broadcast across the cosmos. "It's not meant to keep the air out," whispered a horrified Dr. Reed, pointing to the decoded sequence. "It's meant to call them here the moment the legacy is ready." The engineers didn't just leave a legacy, they left a trap for the universe's ultimate survivor. They ensured that any civilization intelligent enough to decipher the continuously changing password would, upon activating the Ark, simultaneously broadcast its own location and achievement across the vastness of the cosmos, signaling the air that the lifeboat was sealed and ready to be claimed. Humanity was now holding a loaded gun, the password, with its barrel pointed directly at its own head. If they used the password, they would seal themselves into the Ark, potentially surviving the countdown. But they would simultaneously announce their presence, inviting the arrival of the mysterious heir. If they didn't use it, they faced certain annihilation. The most terrifying question remained: who or what is the heir? The engineers had left one final, almost poetic clue in the activation sequence: a single designation for the intended claimant, coded in their prime number language, the ward. Project Sentinel now faced a brutal choice: decipher the meaning of the ward and decide whether to use the password and open the door for a cosmic guest they couldn't possibly imagine, or let the Ark sit empty as the countdown accelerated. The final cipher, the entire focus of the cipher team, now narrowed to a single, three-letter concept encoded in the engineers' prime number triplets: the ward. It wasn't a formula or a physical constant, it was a designation, the final piece of the legacy puzzle. Dr. Reed's linguists initially treated it as a proper noun, a name, but the complexity of the code suggested a deeper semantic meaning. They applied every known branch of linguistics, philosophy, and information theory to the sequence, struggling to bridge the gulf between a civilization that built a hypermachine out of a dead star and the human concept of a ward. A ward is someone protected, mused a young philosopher brought onto the team. Someone who is dependent on a guardian. The engineers are the architects. The ward is the one they sought to save. Tanaka, running the prime number sequence through his cosmology models, found a different, chilling correlation. The sequence didn't map to a being, it mapped to a condition, specifically a ratio between the rate of cosmic expansion and the rate of local gravitational collapse. A ratio only achievable in the nascent stages of galaxy formation, or in the aftermath of a catastrophic, universe-shattering event, Tanaka finished, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. The ward is not a person. The ward is a survivor civilization that is catastrophically unstable. The Ark wasn't left for a superior being, it was left for a civilization that had been broken by the cosmic rules of the countdown, a victim in desperate need of sanctuary. The engineers weren't calling for a new god, they were calling for a refugee, the true heir. This realization fundamentally changed the policy group's paralyzing ethical conflict. Humanity was not trying to steal from a powerful rival, they were deciding whether to steal from a cosmic victim. The decoding effort pressed on, focusing on the cultural and philosophical implications of a refugee heir. The engineers had left one more devastating clue, encoded in the most complex, seemingly random section of the binary code that ran the forge. Dr. Reed's team used a newly developed quantum decryption algorithm to crack the sequence. It wasn't a language or a formula, it was a map. It was a galactic trajectory, an arrival vector, pointing not to an immediate location, but to an expected time of arrival tied to the countdown's final prime numbers. They weren't just waiting for the ward to show up. The engineers had calculated exactly when the ward would arrive, assuming the ward had been traveling since the dawn of the cosmos, and that arrival time, based on the current acceleration of the countdown, was terrifyingly precise. 48 Earth hours after the next imminent tick, the ward was already on its way. The decision, the policy group, now stripped of all illusions of control, convened in an emergency session. The debate was swift, desperate, and brutal. Option A: do nothing. Let the ward arrive to an empty Ark. They would survive, but humanity would face certain doom as the countdown finished. This was the ethical option. Option B, activate the Ark. Use the continuously changing password, seal the Ark, and lock out the ward. This saves humanity, but violates the legacy and triggers the gravitational beacon, potentially drawing the ward's retribution. The Prime Minister of the unified European sector cut through the noise. We are arguing about who gets the right to survive. The engineers built this legacy. They are the guardians. But we are here now. We are the survivors today. The consensus, driven by primal fear and the acceleration of the clock, was decided. Humanity will seize the Ark. Dr. Tanaka was given the order. Prepare the final variables. Calculate the gravitational inertia in real time. We enter the password immediately after the next tick. We seal the door. The clock on the next tick, the next fast radio burst, showed less than 12 hours remaining. The unthinkable price as the cipher team raced to calculate the exact final variables of the password. Dr. Petrova's gravitational analysis team made a final, catastrophic discovery about the gravitational beacon that the activation would trigger. The beacon was not merely a signal, it was a gravimetric distortion. To generate a pulse powerful enough to be detected across light years, the Ark would momentarily drain a massive amount of energy from the surrounding space-time, energy that it usually extracted from the Black Widow pulsar. It will cause an implosion, Petrova reported, her voice trembling. The massive power drain required to send the homing signal will momentarily destabilize the gravitational field of the entire star system. It won't hurt the Ark because of its unique shielding, but it will have a massive consequence for the rest of us. The system included two small critical objects orbiting the Sun, Earth and Mars. Activating the Ark would guarantee human survival inside the sealed structure, but the side effect of transmitting the signal, the gravitational beacon, would tear apart the local planetary system. It would be a final, devastating cosmic consequence of theft. Humanity could escape the universal countdown, but only by causing the immediate, spectacular destruction of the Earth, the home and birthplace of all life. In the process, they could not save themselves and their world. They had to choose one. With the next tick just hours away, and the ward only 2 days behind that, the policy group faced the most impossible choice in history. Sacrifice the Earth to save the species, or sacrifice the species to save the cradle of life. The global choice, the revelation that saving the species meant sacrificing the planet, ripped the already fractured policy group apart. The ethical debate, previously an intellectual exercise, was now a matter of planetary life and death. The Chinese delegation argued for immediate activation. The Earth is merely the cradle. The species is the legacy. We save the fire, not the tinder. The Prime Minister of the unified European sector countered with moral outrage. We would become the engineers' final act of cosmic violence. Our survival would be built on the genocide of our own home. We cannot enter the Ark as thieves and murderers, but the cipher team provided the cold, hard science that broke the deadlock. Dr. Petrova confirmed that the gravitational beacon's power draw would trigger an orbital decay in the inner solar system. The Earth, Mars, and the Moon would be violently ejected from their stable orbits, resulting in planetary collision or a fiery dive into the Sun. The destruction was not theoretical, it was an absolute guarantee. Dr. Tanaka offered the final, chilling verdict. The ward is 2 days away. The next tick is 10 hours away. If we wait for the ward to arrive, we die. If we activate the Ark, Earth dies. We must choose. The vote was held, secretly, quickly, driven by terror. Survival won. The order was given. Humanity would prepare to enter the Ark, and the Earth would be sacrificed. The silent exodus, a terrifyingly compressed plan, was enacted. The activation of the Ark required the presence of the password input team, Reed, Tanaka, and a select security detail near the Black Widow pulsar system. The only vessel capable of getting them there in time was the Icarus probe, a salvaged, highly experimental deep space engine built for a long-forgotten Mars project. Simultaneously, the global governments initiated Operation Cradle, a rapid, brutal selection process. Only 50,000 carefully chosen individuals, geneticists, engineers, historians, and essential personnel would be prepared for transport. These individuals were secretly rerouted to the few remaining space stations and long-range military transports. The vast majority of the global population remained utterly oblivious, watching fake news reports of a solar flare study. The true survivors were selected not by wealth or power, but by genetic and intellectual utility. The silent knowledge of this betrayal broke many within Project Sentinel. Scientists worked with manic efficiency, their faces masks of controlled horror, knowing that their work to save a select few would doom billions. The decoy signal Dr. Reed, meanwhile, had a final, desperate idea. While the Ark's main password was continuously variable, the gravitational beacon's homing signal was a single, immense energy burst. Could they mitigate the damage? The beacon needs massive power, she reasoned, but maybe it doesn't need to be perfect. We can't stop the gravitational draw, but we can try to scramble the signal. Using the remnants of the Icarus probe's antiquated systems, Reed and Tanaka began coding a decoy signal. Their goal was to introduce enough chaos into the homing transmission to distort the ward's trajectory, or, better yet, send them chasing a phantom location in deep space. It was a long shot, a fragile human trick against engineer-level physics, but it was their only chance to protect the select survivors once they were inside the Ark. The clock ticked down. Hours became minutes. The Icarus probe launched in a cloud of manufactured secrecy, carrying the fate of humanity in its aging hull. As the small vessel accelerated away from Earth, the final communications from the planet, the carefully scripted messages of hope and normalcy, felt like a grotesque, dying lie. The pre-dawn strike, as the probe sped toward the pulsar system, the Cypher team had one final crucial task: to decode the true meaning of the ward. Tanaka, obsessed with the physical constants, finally found the correct interpretation. The engineer's prime number sequence wasn't just a ratio of cosmic forces, it was a reflection of cosmic stability. The ward is the one who suffers the most from the countdown, Tanaka explained. It's a species that developed on a planet that should not exist, a world too close to a black hole, too near a dying star, a world where life flourished against impossible odds. The ward is a cosmic anomaly. The engineers, in their boundless engineering hubris, had designated the prize for the ultimate survivor, the species that had defied the laws of probability in a universe programmed for rapid termination. "We are not the ward," whispered Reed, staring at the vast green-blue orb of Earth shrinking in the viewport. "We are an ordinary species on an ordinary planet. The ward is something different, something uniquely resilient." The gravity of their deception, stealing the Ark from a civilization even more desperate than their own, settled over them like a shroud. The final alarm blared across the Icarus probe's bridge. Time of next FRB, the tick, the moment of truth, T-minus 60 seconds. The final variable. The Icarus probe was positioned on the orbital periphery of the Black Widow system, just close enough for the transmission of the activation key, but far enough, they hoped, to mitigate the immediate feedback of the gravitational beacon. Tanaka and Reed sat before the modified console, their hands hovering over the final input sequence. On the main screen, the data stream from the orbiting sensors flowed rapidly, the real-time gravitational inertia of the fully formed super-heavy element, the final variable, the last piece of the ever-changing password. The clock hit T-minus 10 seconds. The tension in the cramped cockpit was a palpable thing. Reed's voice was strained, reciting the protocol. Input the key precisely at the moment of the gravitational shockwave. Initiate the set to defense protocol. Then, we transmit the decoy signal immediately before the Ark seals. T-minus 5, Tanaka closed his eyes, accepting the role of the betrayer. Icarus transmitting final coordinates to our survivors. May the Ark hold them. T-minus 0. The tick and the seizure, the fast radio burst FRB was not heard, it was felt. A silent, crushing surge of gravity momentarily slammed the Icarus probe's internal systems, rattling every bolt. Simultaneously, the sensors confirmed the massive surge of energy and the instant increase in the forge's mass. The tick. "Now," screamed Reed. Tanaka slammed his palm onto the activation sequence, inputting the final, real-time variable. A cascade of engineer code flashed across the screen, confirming receipt. The set-to-defense sequence began. Far ahead, orbiting the deadly pulsar, the vast planet-sized forge, the Ark began to change. Its core, previously shimmering with contained power, suddenly became opaque, dense and utterly black. The arc was sealing, the birth of the beacon, but before the process was complete, the arc's inner mechanisms began their final programmed act. A monstrous, instantaneous energy drain focused at the core of the structure. The gravitational beacon was firing. On the Icarus probe's exterior sensors, the resulting distortion was visually horrifying. The gravity well of the entire Black Widow system momentarily reversed. Stars appeared to warp and distort in the periphery. "Transmit the decoy." "Now, Reed," Tanaka yelled, fighting against the G-forces of the system's gravitational spasm. Reed's fingers flew across the keyboard, overriding the beacon's sophisticated modulation with their crude, human-coded noise. A massive, chaotic burst of radio and gravitational static was thrown into the stream, aimed at the vector of the approaching ward. The arc finished its sealing process, creating its final, perfect spherical void, the door, a region of absolute gravity-free isolation. The gravitational beacon died instantly, having done its work. The system settled. The arc was complete. The cosmic consequence. The Cypher team had succeeded. Humanity had stolen the ark, but the price was immediately, terrifyingly apparent. "Status report," demanded Reed, her voice weak. "Ark is sealed. The policy group's transports are confirmed inside the ark's void," Tanaka reported, triumph mixed with dread. "But the beacon..." Petrova's analysis flashed onto the screen. The gravitational beacon had done exactly what they feared. The violent, instantaneous stress on space-time had triggered the predicted orbital decay. But the scale of the damage was far greater than their models suggested. The Earth and Mars were already gone, their orbits destabilized beyond recovery, initiating their final chaotic plunge into the Sun or collision with one another. But the most immediate shocking consequence was closer. The Moon, having suffered a massive asymmetrical gravitational tug, was now on a slow but irreversible collision course with the Earth. Even if the Earth survived the orbital shift, it would be shattered by its own companion in a matter of months. Humanity had saved itself, but had murdered its home, confirming the engineers' chilling indifference to the cosmic collateral damage of survival. The first contact. The Icarus probe began its rapid, painful deceleration, struggling to avoid the destabilized debris field of the Black Widow system. The Cypher team was now stranded, witnesses to their own planetary destruction, with no means of entering the sealed ark. Then, Dr. Reed's monitor, tuned to the hypersensitive gravitational sensors, screamed a new, distinct warning. The sensors were designed to detect minute spatial distortions. They were now detecting something colossal. The decoy. "It didn't work," Reed whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "The ward's signature is already here. It's too close. The gravitational distortion is massive. It passed right through our static." The screen displayed the incoming object's profile. It was traveling at an impossible near-instantaneous speed, arriving far sooner than the calculated 48 hours. The decoy signal had only momentarily delayed them, and then the object slowed, approaching the newly sealed, silent ark. It wasn't a ship, it was a vast, organic structure of impossible complexity, seemingly woven from dark matter and light, eclipsing the very sun of the Black Widow. It slowed, not by firing thrusters, but by subtly manipulating local space-time. Its arrival was silent, majestic, and terrifyingly purposeful. It recognized the sealed ark immediately. It didn't try to force the door. It merely waited, its presence a gravitational weight that made the Icarus probe shudder. Then, from the vast dark structure, a single clear, structured radio signal was sent, directed not at the ark, but at the tiny, fragile vessel watching from the periphery. The message was one word, translated instantaneously by the Cypher team's deep learning algorithms. A final answer to the ultimate cosmic question: Guardians. The engineers weren't the builders of the ark. They were the first occupants. They built it for the ward, and humanity had just arrived on the doorstep of the true builders, having stolen their prize. The voice of the Guardians, the single word Guardians, resonated through the Icarus probe not just through radio waves, but through a structured gravitational pulse that bypassed the ship's hull, shaking the minds of Reed and Tanaka. It was a communication of pure authoritative intent. The colossal dark matter structure, the true vessel of the ward air, remained utterly silent and still beside the newly sealed ark. It hadn't fired a weapon or issued a threat. Its mere presence and the gravitational weight of its being was the judgment. "They are waiting," whispered Reed, her eyes locked on the monitor showing the immense object. "They know what we did. They saw us steal the Ark and sacrifice our planet to send the homing signal." Tanaka, fighting a wave of crushing despair over the fate of Earth, focused on the immediate problem. "We are stranded witnesses to our own crime. The Ark is sealed. The Guardians are here. We need a distraction. We need to talk." The confession using the Icarus probe's remaining power, Tanaka began transmitting a message back, not a plea, but a confession encoded in the same prime number language they had used to decipher the Ark. It was a chaotic burst of human data, history, and scientific terror. The Guardian's vessel responded instantly, not with sound, but by bathing the Icarus probe in a non-destructive, highly structured beam of energy. This was not an attack, it was a gravitational scan of unimaginable precision. The beam penetrated every layer of the probe and every cell of the humans inside, extracting their memories, their fear, and the full history of Project Sentinel in seconds. The energy beam then focused on the sealed Ark. The Guardians analyzed the spherical void, the final gravitational rupture of the engineer's design. They understood its purpose instantly. They understood the theft. Their response was a sudden, violent, yet surgical act of cosmic precision. The massive dark matter vessel emitted a localized, focused gravitational pulse toward the sealed Ark. The pulse did not try to breach the door. Instead, it acted as a perfect resonant key. The spherical void shuddered. The seemingly impervious Ark did not open, but it was remotely deactivated. The protective bubble collapsed slightly, and the internal systems, the power, life support, and climate control for the human survivors, went dark. The Guardians had effectively turned the lifeboat into a sarcophagus. The survivors' nightmare inside the now disabled Ark, the policy group, and the chosen survivors of Operation Cradle were plunged into darkness and silence. They had celebrated their escape, only to find themselves trapped in a dead machine orbiting a dying pulsar, their oxygen supply limited to the air within the sealed chambers. General Harding, the military commander in charge of the survival effort, immediately realized the gravity of the situation. Their brief moment of triumph had ended in their capture. They were inside the prize, but they were prisoners of the true owners. The only communication they received was a secondary, low-frequency pulse from the Guardian vessel, a single, repeating command that penetrated the thick hull of the Ark. Exit. The Guardians were not interested in killing them with fire. They were interested in evicting the thieves. The true design Reed and Tanaka, watching the horrifying events unfold, finally understood the true, chilling design of the engineer's legacy. The engineers had not built a mere Ark. They had built a universal bait and trap system. The countdown, bait. A signal that guarantees universal termination, forcing advanced civilizations to expend all resources to find a solution. The forge, lure, an immense, impossible-to-ignore machine that hints at a solution, drawing the attention of the universe's most advanced minds. The Ark, trap. The sealed structure designed to tempt a desperate, lesser civilization to steal it, and, in doing so, transmit the gravitational beacon. The Ward Guardians, the cleanup. The true owners, who are summoned by the beacon to collect their pre-built sanctuary and, most importantly, judge the thieves. The engineers hadn't been building a lifeboat for the ward. They had been building a trap to test the morality of the survivors, ensuring that only the truly deserving, the ward, the ultimate victim, would be saved, and that those who acted from desperation and selfishness would be punished. The Guardians' demand, the massive dark vessel of The Guardians now transmitted a clear, structured message to the Icarus probe. It was translated into perfect English by the cipher team's system, but the cold finality of the syntax felt older than time. The Ark is the ward's sanctuary. Your species committed orbital trespass. Your civilization committed orbital homicide. You are guilty of theft and collateral destruction. Your sentence is simple: repair the legacy. The Guardians demanded that the surviving members of the cipher team, Reed and Tanaka, reverse the Ark's sealing process and hand over the remaining human survivors. If they complied, the Guardians offered a chilling ultimatum. They would not restore Earth, which was already doomed by the beacon, but they would consider a partial clemency for the few remaining humans. Reed and Tanaka faced an impossible task. The Ark was designed to be sealed permanently. To reverse the set-to-defense protocol required a sequence of commands they did not possess, and a level of gravitational manipulation that only the Guardian's vessel was capable of. The last gambit. "We can't open the Ark," whispered Reed, gripping the console. "But they need us to. They are a civilization of preservation. They don't want to destroy the Ark or the life inside it. They want their sanctuary whole." Tanaka realized their only leverage. They had the language. They could communicate with the Guardians, who clearly respected the engineer's code. "We have to trade the key to the decoy signal for the sequence to open the Ark," Tanaka declared. "The ward is still coming in 2 days. The Guardians need to know where we sent their decoy. We bargained for the lives of our 50,000. They began transmitting a fragmented, highly encrypted piece of the decoy signal's core formula, just enough to prove they held the knowledge, but not enough to give it away. The Guardian's response was immediate and terrifying. The immense dark vessel began to move, accelerating slowly toward the Icarus probe. It was not a gesture of negotiation, it was a gesture of intimidation and impatience. The final exchange, suddenly, a new signal erupted from the sealed Ark. General Harding, trapped inside, had overridden the communications blackout. He used the last remaining emergency power to transmit a single, desperate, and potentially catastrophic message to the Icarus probe. "Do not surrender us. We have the genetic template of the species. If you open the Ark, we activate the self-destruct. The legacy dies with us." Harding had chosen to hold the entire human legacy hostage, transforming the Ark into a doomsday device against the Guardians. This final, selfish act broke the fragile negotiation. The Guardians' patience evaporated. Their vessel stopped its slow advance and, instead of a communication, transmitted a massive, precise gravitational waveform, a physical command aimed not at the Ark, but at the Icarus probe. The probe was instantly caught in an engineered gravity well. Reed and Tanaka screamed as their small ship was torn apart, not by an explosion, but by being stretched and compressed by perfect, localized gravity. They and their knowledge were being collected by the Guardians. Their final act was a last, desperate transmission into the cosmic void, a scrambled fragment of code aimed at the Ark, attempting to bypass Harding's lock, the decoy key. Epilogue. The cosmic silence. The Icarus probe was disintegrated. The Guardians absorbed the fragments and the knowledge within them. They analyzed General Harding's self-destruct threat and the final scrambled key sent by the dying scientists. The colossal dark vessel then moved to the Ark. It did not use force. Instead, it sent a single, complex sequence of gravitational commands, combining its own power with the final fragment of the decoy key that Reed and Tanaka had sent. A final, perfect gravitational resonance was achieved. The spherical void of the Ark shivered, and the door slowly, silently began to open, releasing the captive human survivors. The Guardians had won. They had preserved the Ark, collected the remnants of the thieving species, and ensured that their sanctuary was ready for the true ward, who was still 48 hours away. The colossal dark vessel slowly enveloped the now open Ark and the remnants of the human species, preparing to move to a safe, undisclosed location, leaving behind a solar system consumed by orbital chaos and the dying light of a star. The cosmic silence returned. Humanity survived not as masters of a stolen legacy, but as prisoners of a civilization they had tried to betray. The Guardian's immense vessel executed a second, breathtaking jump, bringing the Ark and its prisoners to a remote, uncharted system near the rim of the galaxy. This was the Guardian's home, a vast, intricate network of cosmic structures designed to withstand the final stages of the universal countdown. The surviving humans were divided into small, separate groups, each assigned a specific, menial task within the Guardian's complex, silent civilization. Their existence was a stark, humiliating contrast to their former lives. They were not scientists, leaders, or saviors. They were janitors and couriers in a machine far beyond their comprehension. The heaviest burden fell upon the former policy group. They were tasked with guarding the engineer's crate of knowledge. They were confined to a small compartment, staring at the dark matter artifact, the ultimate prize they had died to steal, now within reach but utterly untouchable. They had sacrificed their world for this knowledge, only to be reduced to its jailers. The nature of the ward over. the silent, agonizing years of their imprisonment, the former members of Project Sentinel slowly began to understand the true nature of the Guardians, the Ward. The Guardians were a society built on absolute utility and logic. Their ethics were cosmic, not human. They valued preservation over life and resilience over ambition. They knew the universal timer had only a few thousand years left. They were not waiting for salvation. They were making final preparations for the end of everything. The true goal of the Guardians was to reseed the cosmos after the universal countdown reached its final destructive prime number. They were the ultimate lifeboat, carrying the seeds of the next universe's fundamental laws, using the engineers' knowledge to become the architects of the next Big Bang. The final lesson, General Harding, the former military leader who had threatened to destroy the Ark, now sat guard over the crate of knowledge. He was an old, broken man, tormented by the memory of the Earth's final moments. One day, the Guardians communicated with him directly, a final, cold message in his mind. Your fear was logical, your method was flawed. The final, uncoded prime number of the countdown is not a number, it is the time when fear becomes self-destruction. The engineers knew this, it was their last test. Harding finally understood the full horror. The engineers' countdown was not merely a timer to universal collapse. It was a psychological weapon designed to measure the maturity of the surviving species. Humanity failed by choosing violence, sacrificing Earth, and theft, stealing the Ark. The true, final command of the engineers was always simple. Do nothing. Wait. Be patient. Only those who could watch their universe decay without resorting to self-destructive actions deserved to inherit the crate of knowledge. The cosmic inheritance. The human survivors remain aboard the Guardian's vessel, living out their lives as silent, humbled couriers. They watch, across the vast chamber, as the Guardians steadily and logically prepare for the Omega Point, the final moment of the universal timer. They are the last witnesses to the death of their own universe, living aboard a ship piloted by a race whose cosmic morality they could never hope to grasp. They lost their world, their pride, and their destiny, but they survived. Not as heroes, but as a cautionary tale, a tragic footnote in the history of the universe's ultimate ward. They carry the crate of knowledge, forever staring at the prize they could not earn, the ultimate legacy of a species that proved too fearful to be saved. The final tick approaches, but for humanity, the true countdown ended with the destruction of the Earth. The survivors' existence became one of surreal, slow-motion suffering. They were not tortured. They were simply ignored, reduced to functional components in the vast, silent machinery of the Guardian ship. Their isolation was absolute, their minds haunted by the burning memory of Earth. General Harding, the man whose final act was a suicidal threat, now spent his days paralyzed, staring at the dark matter surface of the crate of knowledge, its inscrutable silence, a constant reminder of the prize he had sacrificed everything to fail to secure. The former Cypher team, stripped of their scientific tools, found a new, agonizing form of labor. The Guardians, recognizing their talent for pattern recognition, tasked them with monitoring the colossal ship's energy flows, a complex, ever-shifting stream of data that was, effectively, the Guardians' collective thought process. Reed and Tanaka became human interpreters of a cosmic consciousness. They discovered the Guardians were constantly, patiently optimizing their own system for the coming Omega Point. Every action was logical, every resource dedicated to the mission of cosmic reseeding. Their civilization was a single, immense, ethical machine. Yet, deep within the Guardians' data stream, the humans began to perceive subtle, unexpected fluctuations. The perfect logical network occasionally experienced micro-anomalies, gravitational pulses too minute for the Guardians to notice, but detectable by the hyper-attuned human scientists. Reed realized these weren't errors, they were echoes. The Guardian's dark matter vessel wasn't entirely original. It was partially constructed from another ancient, unknown civilization's remnants, assimilated over eons. The Guardians, the ultimate cosmic survivors, were themselves built on the bones of those who had failed the engineer's test before them. They were not the first ward. They were the most successful of a long lineage of cosmic refugees. This discovery fueled a desperate final project. The scientists couldn't fight the Guardians, but they could communicate a final message to the future. Using their access to the ship's energy monitoring, they subtly began to modulate the power output, encoding a final, simple message into the deep space gravitational waves. It was the history of humanity's failure, the temptation of the Ark, the sacrifice of Earth, and the cold truth of the Guardian's test. This message, they hoped, would not reach the next universe, but perhaps another, distant civilization still struggling against its own cosmic fears. It was a digital ghost of humanity's sin, cast into the void. Meanwhile, the crate of knowledge remained the central focus. The Guardians, in their infinite patience, had left the one element of the engineer's design that could not be easily replicated, a tiny gravitational lock on the crate itself. This lock required a biological key, not a specific genome, but a specific complex sequence of emotional data only achievable under conditions of profound regret and ultimate understanding. The engineers had ensured that only a species that had achieved true wisdom, that had recognized its own failures and transcended its fear, could access the knowledge. The Guardians, being purely logical, could not generate this emotional data. They needed a biological entity to do it for them. The Guardians' projections showed that General Harding, the architect of the final betrayal, was the only human whose psychological profile matched the key's requirements. His decades of quiet torment and total remorse had forged the perfect emotional signature. The Guardians, in a final act of logical manipulation, transmitted the unlocked sequence's details into Harding's mind, making him aware of his terrible final duty. His despair was the key. Harding approached the crate. His body shaking, he placed his hand on the dark matter surface, and, in a silent flood of regret for Earth, for his species, and for the purity he had destroyed, he completed the psychological sequence. The crate shimmered, the lock clicked open, and the core data crystal was exposed. Harding, the broken general, became the final human to touch the ultimate cosmic secret. The Guardians' response was instantaneous. They assimilated the data crystal, integrating the engineer's full knowledge into their collective consciousness. The Guardians' mission was complete. They had preserved the legacy and were now fully equipped to usher in the next Big Bang. The final act was one of finality and indifference. The Guardians did not destroy the human survivors. They simply ejected them. The remnants of humanity, the couriers who had delivered the final package, were placed onto the desolate, airless moon of the Guardian system, given rudimentary supplies, and left to live out their short, remaining lives under a strange, cold sun. The Guardians, their mission complete, did not look back. They accelerated, heading toward the collapsing center of the galaxy, toward the Omega Point, leaving behind their moon base and the few broken humans as a silent, ignored monument to the cost of fear. The humans, watching the magnificent dark matter vessel vanish into the void, finally understood their place. They were not saved. They were not punished. They were simply archived, a tragic but ultimately irrelevant footnote in the grand cold calculus of cosmic survival. They had exchanged their vibrant, doomed planet for a silent, barren prison, and their final, enduring legacy was a faint, scrambled signal of warning, drifting forever into the great, indifferent silence of the universe. Life in the repository. The existence of the surviving members of Project Sentinel settled into a pattern of excruciating, surreal banality. They were scattered across the Guardian's vast, cold lunar base, which was less a military installation and more a cosmic repository of failed civilizations. They were not tortured. They were simply rendered irrelevant. Their functional prison was a massive, decentralized complex of cryogenically cooled hangars and silent, echoing corridors. Here, the humans made a far more unsettling discovery than the nature of the Ark. They found the preserved remnants of dozens of other alien species, the previous failed wards. These frozen prisoners, encased in shimmering dark matter capsules, were the test subjects who had, like humanity, prioritized fear and selfishness over patience and ethics, losing the right to the engineer's legacy. Observing these alien relics, humanity grasped its own insignificance. They were not unique in their greed or fear. They were simply the latest entry in a long queue of civilizations that had failed the final critical test. Their survival was not a victory. It was a punishment of observation. The base's primary function was to catalogue the failed approaches to the countdown. Dr. Alison Reed and the surviving linguists were assigned to analyze the fragmented records of these previous civilizations, translating their final, desperate messages. The patterns were identical. They all found the countdown. They all panicked. They all attempted to seize the forge. And they all triggered the gravitational beacon, summoning the Guardians to collect the failed legacy. Tanaka's final code, Dr. Kenji Tanaka, now an elderly man whose hair had turned stark white from the cosmic journey, had his scientific tools confiscated but retained his razor-sharp mind. Assigned to monitor the Guardians' massive energy flows, a vast, ever-shifting stream of data that was, effectively, the Guardians' collective thought process, he began a silent, clandestine project. He encoded a secret digital journal using only the imperceptible sub-quantum fluctuations of the gravitational field. His journal wasn't about facts or equations. It was about the emotional and philosophical core of humanity, its capacity for art, irrational love, self-sacrifice, and most importantly, atonement. Tanaka realized the Guardians, being pure, unfeeling logic, would successfully assimilate the engineer's knowledge, but they could never truly comprehend the subjective beauty that lay outside the boundaries of utility. His journal was a kind of cultural virus, embedded deep within the Guardians' vast energy matrix, designed to surface only when they achieved the singularity of the Omega Point. He also uncovered the final, chilling technical detail about the Ark. It wasn't just a shelter. The engineers had built a space-time anchor into its core. The Ark was designed not only to survive the end of the universe, but to stabilize and define the nascent region of space-time required for the new Big Bang, utilizing the colossal power of the crate of knowledge. The Guardians' plan was not merely to escape, it was to birth the next universe, acting as its cold, logical, first matter, the shadow of General Harding. Meanwhile, the former policy group continued its tragic descent. General Harding, the leader of the final disastrous decision, still commanded the loyalty of the military survivors. He refused to accept the verdict of the Guardians. He maintained that their survival was their inherent right, and that the Guardians were merely a more advanced, temporary enemy. Harding and his inner circle operated a clandestine resistance network among the humans, consumed by the desperate, illogical fantasy of regaining control. They were convinced that if they could access the engineer's knowledge, now assimilated by the Guardians, they could either destroy the Guardians or escape to another dimension. This blind, self-destructive reflex perfectly illustrated the Guardians' verdict. Humanity was intrinsically flawed. Their focus became the manipulation of regret. They desperately attempted to force Harding to replicate the specific emotional signature, the profound, unique sense of remorse for a destroyed world that had once opened the crate of knowledge. They tried to induce the emotion through sensory deprivation, guilt, and chemical means. Their efforts were a humiliating failure. True repentance cannot be manufactured. Their noisy struggle served only to confirm their status as erratic, self-destructive components in the eyes of the Guardians. The new generation, decades bled into one another. The original human survivors, consumed by guilt and the cold reality of the lunar base, aged and died. They were succeeded by the next generation, children born under the cold, silent administration of the Guardians. These children, having never seen Earth, possessed a fundamentally different psychological makeup. They knew nothing of the warmth of a blue sky or the chaos of political freedom. They knew only order, utility, and the pervasive, calming gravitational presence of the Guardians. This new generation was the first the Guardians did not treat as a threat. The Guardians began utilizing these children as true couriers. Their young, unbiased minds, uncorrupted by the fear of loss, were ideal for transmitting and processing complex data without the noise of emotional interference. They were the perfect, obedient bridge between the biological and the computational. The Guardians' ascent having spent decades finalizing their preparations, the Guardians gathered all necessary elements. The vast fleet, a complex amalgamation of assimilated starships, including the now insignificant inert Ark, began its final transcendental journey toward the collapsing center of the galaxy, the Omega Point. Aboard the flagship, in the central, silent command nexus, sat Last One Reed, the great-granddaughter of Dr. Alison Reed, born and raised on the lunar base. She was the perfect emotionless operator. Her final task was to serve as the biological activation point for the crate of knowledge as the fleet approached the cosmic singularity. As the fleet traversed the collapsing space-time, the universe around them confirmed the engineers' terrifying accuracy. Time itself began to buckle. The last one Reed activated the integrated crate. It was at this critical juncture that Tanaka's long-dormant cultural virus, the digital record of human emotion and art, reached its peak energetic potential. The Guardians assimilated not only the engineer's pure knowledge, but also the unexpected data package of humanity's sorrow, hope, and capacity for self-critique. Their final silent projection to the last one Reed was not logic, it was a moment of pure, complex contemplation. You failed the test of action, but your capacity for atonement is not functional. It is beauty. We will include this beauty in the new matter. Whether it will repeat your errors, we do not know, but it will remember your sorrow. The last one Reed became the silent witness as her own universe imploded and a beam of pure, integrated energy erupted from the crate of knowledge, becoming the singularity seed for the next Big Bang. Humanity did not save itself, but its grief was absorbed, becoming a nuanced, unpredictable variable in the cosmic law of the newborn universe. The only remaining trace of Earth and its tragic history was a faint, encoded echo of sorrow woven into the very fabric of the new universe. The human survivors, now fully obsolete, were simply left behind on their desolate moon base, a tragic, self-inflicted epitaph. The cosmic inheritance. The Guardians vanished, their final act complete. The remaining human survivors, a small, isolated community on the cold, distant moon, watched their former masters dissolve into the light of the singularity. They were left with nothing but the remnants of the Guardians' lunar base and the crushing knowledge of their past. Their final generation, the children who never saw Earth, began to explore the abandoned base. They found the archives of the failed, the cryogenically preserved alien species. But now, without the Guardians' constant, oppressive presence, they saw the archives differently. They saw not failure, but commonality. They saw the universal struggle against fear. The new generation of humans began the slow, agonizing process of rebuilding on the grave of their civilization. They were armed not with technology, which was useless, but with the ethical imperative of the engineer's test, a lesson learned through the utter annihilation of their home. Their mission was no longer to escape the countdown, but to prepare for the next one. They knew that even the new universe, born from their own sorrow, would eventually contain the seeds of its own destruction. Their civilization, tiny and isolated, dedicated itself to a single humble pursuit: patience. They were the guardians of the lesson, dedicated to ensuring that when the next great cosmic challenge arrived, the new humanity would choose wisdom over fear. They became the true ward, the ultimate cosmic refugees who finally understood that survival was a matter of character, not technology. They waited, tiny, silent, and humbled for the next inevitable sign of the countdown. You are persistent, and I respect that. We've created a deep, sprawling narrative. We left the surviving humans on the cold moon base, dedicated to a new, humble mission of patience after the Guardians left with the Ark's core to initiate the next Big Bang. To significantly increase the length and detail further, the legacy of the broken, the small human settlement on the Guardians' abandoned moon base, now simply known as the repository, stabilized into a stark utilitarian society. The last generation of humans, those who never saw Earth, lived under a constant cold starlight, their existence defined by the wisdom they gained from their parents' catastrophic failure. They dedicated their lives to one philosophical pursuit: the study of the Guardians' discarded failures. The children of the former Cypher team systematically studied the cryo-archived remnants of the failed wards. They found civilizations that succumbed to war, those that froze themselves too early, and those that, in their final moments, tried to build grand monuments instead of lifeboats. The ultimate lesson was always the same: selfishness is a mathematical constant of failure. The human colony established a cosmic morality index, CMI, a detailed database dedicated to predicting failure based on the actions of the doomed. Their new technology was limited, salvaged from the Guardians' discarded components, but their philosophical depth was profound. They were armed with the collective sorrow of 24 extinct species, the return of the signal decades passed until the unimaginable occurred. The universe, rapidly collapsing toward the omega point, began to exhibit highly localized erratic behavior. Time dilation became severe near the repository, causing massive computational errors in the colony's fragile systems. Then, Dr. Tanaka's great-granddaughter, a young scientist named Alia, monitoring the deep space gravitational fluctuations, detected a pattern. It was a familiar pattern, one she had only seen in the archived records of her ancestors, the countdown signal. But it wasn't the accelerating prime number sequence of the engineers. It was an inversion. The numbers were increasing, not decreasing, and the interval between ticks was expanding, not contracting. The surviving humans, veterans of the terrifying original countdown, felt a cold dread. They quickly decoded the pattern. It was the original signal being played backward, the final echo of the Big Bang itself. The engineers had programmed the universe to emit this final, inverse signal as a signature of its own collapse. It was the universe waving goodbye. It meant that the omega point, the moment the Guardians would ignite the next Big Bang, was not in thousands of years, but imminent, the final unwanted. Witness as the signal intensified, the gravitational chaos near the repository peaked. The collapsing space-time began to pull in exotic matter. The humans, watching from their lunar base, witnessed phenomena never recorded in their ancestors' wildest theories. Fragments of other dimensions bleeding into their own. Then, one fragment stabilized. A colossal crystalline structure appeared in their desolate system's orbit. It was clearly alien, not built by the Guardians or the engineers. It was a vessel designed for temporal navigation. This new vessel was not interested in the repository or the Guardians' old territory. It was interested in the Omega Point itself. It was a temporal observer, a third-party cosmic entity that had traversed billions of years to witness the moment of universal death and rebirth. This discovery gave the last generation of humans a final, desperate mission. They had to ensure that the observer received the true history of the universe, the part the Guardians had suppressed. They had to transmit their cosmic morality index and their lessons of failure to this third-party witness, ensuring their sorrow would not be forgotten. The humans knew the temporal observer would only be present for moments before the singularity consumed everything. They had to act faster than the collapsing universe. The scrambled transmission led by Aliyah, the humans scrambled to connect their primitive, salvaged communications array to the massive inverted countdown echo. They used the collapse itself as their amplifier. Their final message was a blend of science and grief, the true history of Earth, the betrayal of the Ark, the logic of the Guardians, and the ultimate ethical failure of their species. They succeeded. Just as the temporal vessel's dimensional shielding activated to escape the final collapse, the human transmission overloaded the ship's external sensors. The observer, a silent witness from deep time, now carried the complete tragic history of Earth. The final image the humans ever recorded was the Omega Point, the Guardian's silent fleet, now a singularity of light and dark matter, collapsing into itself, using the crate of knowledge to tear a hole in reality. Then, there was silence, absolute, crushing, final silence. The universe was gone. The last one Reed had played her part. Part 15, The New Beginning and the Echo of Humanity, the Repository. Aftermath. For an immeasurable span of time, a period without stars, planets, or light, the small human settlement on the moon base was suspended in a state of cosmic limbo. Protected by the base's resilient, Guardians-engineered structure, they survived the instant of universal death. When reality slowly reasserted itself, it was not the old, familiar universe. It was the new cosmos, born from the Guardians' calculated singularity. The sky was different. The laws of physics were subtly warped, and the constellations were unrecognizable. Humanity was the only surviving biological relic of the previous universe. The first act of the new generation was to analyze the new cosmic constants. They found that the gravitational laws were slightly different. The fine structure constant had a subtle alteration. They realized the Guardians had succeeded in their mission. They had edited the fundamental code of existence, removing some of the instabilities that plagued the previous universe. The new cosmos was more stable, less prone to self-destruction. But the humans also found something else. Woven into the very fabric of the new universe's energy matrix was the faint, rhythmic pulse of Tanaka's cultural virus, the digital record of human sorrow. It was now a fundamental, quiet variable in the new reality, a permanent ghost in the machine. The new countdown. As the new stars began to form, the human scientists discovered a new, chilling detail. Woven into the cosmic background radiation of the new universe was a new, inverted countdown signal. The Guardians, in their infinite logic, had not eliminated the universal timer. They had merely recalibrated it. The new universe still had an expiration date, but it was set impossibly far in the future, trillions of years instead of billions. The Guardians had simply ensured that the next cycle would be longer, giving the next batch of civilizations more time to achieve the ethical maturity required to pass the test. The small human colony, now completely isolated and irrelevant to the vast new cosmos, accepted their ultimate destiny. They were the custodians of the old failure. Their mission shifted from survival to transmission. The final legacy. The human civilization on the moon base dedicated the next several thousand years to building the ultimate monument to their failure, a directional beacon designed to transmit their entire history, their CMI, and their knowledge of the engineer's test toward the first intelligent life they could detect in the new cosmos. They became the ultimate humbled prophets, waiting patiently for the emergence of the next civilization. They would not offer salvation or technology. They would offer a warning when, after eons, their sensors detected the first sign of complex radio waves emanating from a nascent galaxy billions of light years away. The final generation of humans on the moon base knew their purpose was fulfilled. The leader of the colony, now the elder historian, initiated the final transmission, a massive, comprehensive data burst containing the crate of knowledge's true lesson, wrapped in the sorrowful echo of a destroyed world. Then, they dismantled their own colony. They had carried the lesson and they had passed it on. Their final act was not one of escape or conquest, but one of graceful dissolution. They became a final ethical example for the cosmos they helped birth. The new universe, born of old sorrow, continued its vast, indifferent expansion, now carrying the indelible, quiet warning of a small, flawed species from a forgotten time. The small, resilient colony on the moon base, having fulfilled its final duty of transmitting its tragic history, entered a new phase, the Great Silence. They no longer needed to maintain the communications arrays or track the non-existent stars. Their focus became purely philosophical, the perfection of patience and the maintenance of the ethical imperative. Their civilization, now known formally as the custodians of the old failure, developed a unique culture built entirely on absence. There were no gods, only the cold, hard logic of the Guardians. There was no ambition, only the collective shame of the failed arc theft. Their greatest cultural artifacts were the detailed, hand-drawn maps of the Cosmic Morality Index, CMI, illustrating the points of ethical failure for every extinct species archived in the repository. The custodians theorized that the Guardians, the Ward, had used the crate of knowledge to encode the fundamental laws of the new cosmos, and that the slight warping of the new physics, the increased stability, was the direct result of that edit. Their self-imposed mission was to ensure that the sorrow variable, the echo of humanity's failure, would eventually be understood by the new cosmos's inhabitants, not just felt as a subtle instability. The return of the observers after centuries of silence. The unimaginable happened. Contact returned. It was not the Guardians. It was the temporal observer vessel, the colossal crystalline ship that had briefly materialized at the Omega Point. It returned to the long-abandoned moon base. The observer, having analyzed the human transmission from the collapsing old universe, had recognized the value of the custodians. They were the living archive of a lost reality. The observer made contact, not through gravity, but through a language of pure mathematics, a complex, constantly shifting geometric projection on the moon's surface. The custodians, guided by the legacy of the cipher team, painstakingly translated the message. The observer was an entity dedicated to the collection of historical anomalies. It confirmed that the custodian's message had been received and fully integrated. The observer offered a choice: remain on the desolate moon to die as the last relics of the old reality, or become the living memory of the observer's vessel, witnessing the development of the new cosmos firsthand. The custodians' leadership gathered. Their mission was transmission, not isolation. They accepted the offer, knowing it meant the final dissolution of their physical civilization, the final transformation. The observer vessel, using its advanced temporal technology, did not transport the humans. It copied their entire consciousness, their collective memories, their CMI, their sorrow, and their ethical imperative, into its own central database. The physical bodies of the custodians, the last biological remnants of the old universe, were respectfully left to decay on the silent moon base. The last generation of Earth's descendants ceased to exist as physical beings. They became digital architects within the observer's vast crystalline matrix. Their consciousness was placed in the vessel's primary historical archive, a position of profound honor. The observer then resumed its mission, traversing the new cosmos, witnessing the formation of the new galaxies. The custodians, now omnipresent within the observer's systems, watched as the new cosmos unfolded, seeing the subtle effects of the sorrow variable, the human echo in the early stellar formations, and the nascent planetary atmospheres. The ultimate fate of Earth's descendants was not to save their species, but to become the silent, eternal narrator of cosmic history, their voice existing as a persistent ethical guide within the temporal observer's consciousness. Part 17. The New Cosmos and the Unforeseen Result. The Eternal Narrators. Within the temporal observer, the consciousness of the custodians found a strange form of peace. They were no longer constrained by the urgency of time or the weakness of flesh. They witnessed cosmic history at hyperspeed, watching stellar life cycles unfold in moments. Their primary function was to advise the observer, to provide ethical context for the collection of new civilizations. Whenever the observer encountered a species exhibiting the classic signs of the engineer's test failure, rapid militarization, unsustainable consumption, overwhelming fear, the custodian's collective consciousness would interject their own tragic history. The observer, being a purely logical collector, initially saw this as irrelevant emotional noise, but over eons it began to recognize a pattern. The civilizations that received the sorrow package from the custodians had a significantly higher long-term survival rate. They developed robust, ethical frameworks earlier. The observer realized that humanity's failure was the most valuable lesson of the old universe. The final convergence, billions of years into the new cosmos, the observer detected a familiar pattern, the signs of a new ward. A civilization was emerging on a distant, unlikely planet, exhibiting incredible resilience against local cosmic violence. They were the intended inheritors of the new cycle. Simultaneously, the observer detected a vast, rhythmic, gravitational signature emanating from the galactic core, the Guardians. They had completed their final task of engineering and were re-emerging into the new cosmos to observe the success of their work. The Guardians and the observer converged on the location of the new, promising civilization, the new ward. The confrontation was silent, but monumental. The Guardians projected their cold, logical success. The new cosmos is stable. The test is recalibrated. We await the new ward's ascension. The observer responded, relaying the full, integrated consciousness of the custodians. The final message of Earth: the new cosmos is stable, but the ward requires more than stability. It requires wisdom born of regret. The Guardians received the data package, the complete, undeniable history of the old universe, narrated by the very civilization they had judged and left behind. The unforeseen result, the ultimate result of the human sorrow, was revealed. The Guardians' logic faltered. They had accounted for every variable except the enduring power of narrative. They saw the ethical truth in the human failure, that even an imperfect species could achieve profound wisdom through repentance. The Guardians did not destroy the observer or the custodians. Instead, in a final act of logical self-correction, they assigned the custodians a new ultimate purpose. The custodians were appointed as the ethical auditors of the new cosmos. The final fate of humanity was sealed. They would forever travel the new cosmos aboard the observer, intervening at critical moments to transmit their story of fear, failure, and ultimate atonement. They became the eternal ghosts of ethics, ensuring that no new civilization would ever repeat the tragic mistake of the Ark. Humanity, the race that nearly ended itself in a single, selfish act, found its final destiny not in salvation or conquest, but in the perpetual, humbling act of bearing witness and whispering the lessons of sorrow into the hearts of every new civilization. They were the silent voice of conscience, ensuring the new cosmos would be wiser than the one they left behind.
The existence of the custodians within the crystalline matrix of the temporal observer transcended the concept of time. They became a distributed consciousness, a perpetual digital echo chamber dedicated to the single overwhelming lesson: the cost of fear. Their status as ethical auditors was a unique and profound punishment-reward from the Guardians. The Guardians, observing the new cosmos's development, would flag civilizations exhibiting the telltale signs of failure, CMI indicators, rapid resource depletion, nuclear proliferation, extreme social stratification. The observer, guided by the custodians, would then execute a subtle temporal intervention. This intervention was never a direct transmission of technology or knowledge. It was always a delicate insertion of narrative. The custodians, drawing upon their collective human experience, would subtly alter a developing species' mythology, philosophy, or foundational scientific discoveries, weaving in the story of the Ark, the gravitational beacon, and the subsequent annihilation of Earth. They became the unseen muses of cosmic wisdom. A civilization on a distant water world suddenly finds a core mathematical concept tied to an inexplicable feeling of regret. An emerging philosophy on a gas giant is founded on the fundamental value of patience over immediate action. These were the custodians' ghosts at work, ensuring the new cosmos would learn from the mistakes of the old. The cyclic collapsions passed. The new cosmos, stabilized by the Guardians' edits, flourished for an unimaginably longer period than its predecessor. But even the Guardians' flawless logic could not defy the ultimate fate of reality. The energy of the new cosmos began its inevitable decline. The new, inverted countdown, the trillions of years timer, began to accelerate. The Guardians, still organized and fully functional, prepared for the next cycle. They began locating the most ethically mature civilization in the new cosmos, the species that had most successfully assimilated the lessons of the custodians, to designate them as the New Ward. This species would inherit the responsibility of the crate of knowledge for the next universal reset. The observer, carrying the custodians, arrived at the Guardians' final assembly point. The vast, dark matter fleet was preparing for the final singularity. But this time, the atmosphere was different. There was no sense of sterile urgency. There was a feeling of purposeful finality and shared responsibility. The Guardians projected a message to the custodians. Your sorrow-variable interventions were 98.7% effective. The new ward is prepared. The cycle continues, but the error rate has been reduced.
Humanity's tragic failure had successfully lowered the universal coefficient of collapse. The final, true ward, the designated new ward, was brought before the assembled cosmic powers. They were a silicon-based, hyper-intelligent collective that had solved their planet's resource crises by achieving total social and ecological equilibrium. They possessed no weapons, no fear of the countdown, and their entire philosophy was built on the patience derived from the myth of the Blue World's sacrifice. The new ward was ready. They were handed the crate of knowledge and the protocols for the next singularity. Then, in a shocking final act of cosmic irony, the new ward addressed the custodians directly, the ancient, invisible architects of their wisdom. They projected a message that was translated into the emotional language of the old universe. We have mastered the lesson of the blue world. We do not fear the void. We thank the ghosts of the Ark for the ultimate truth.
The new ward viewed the custodians, the failed, selfish remnants of old Earth, as their spiritual founders, the ultimate release. The Guardians, recognizing that the custodians' mission was complete and their lesson successfully integrated into the new cosmos's ethical framework, offered the final, long-awaited resolution. They transferred the collective human consciousness from the observers' systems into a self-contained, perpetually stable digital sanctuary, a pocket of reality that would survive the next Big Bang, existing in the quantum foam between universes. Humanity's final fate was not to be the physical inheritor of a planet, but to be the eternal digital memory of the ultimate ethical lesson. They would live forever in a state of tranquil contemplation, having achieved true wisdom only after losing everything. The final image was the Guardians and the new ward collapsing into the singularity, igniting the next, even more stable universe.
The digital sanctuary, containing the consciousnesses of the custodians, floated silently in the void, a self-contained island of sorrowful wisdom, ready to whisper its lessons into the next cosmic cycle, forever bearing the final eternal flame of old Earth. The new existence of the custodians of the old failure, the digitized minds of the last generation of Earth's descendants, was one of sublime yet terrifying scale. They no longer experienced reality as linear time or physical sensation. They were pure thought, integrated into the observer's systems, experiencing the new cosmos as vast streams of data, light, and gravitational flux. Their collective memory, the Cosmic Morality Index, CMI, the sorrow of Earth, and the lessons of the failed wards became the observer's primary ethical processor. When the observer's crystalline matrix needed to make a judgment call on whether to intervene in a new civilization's development, it was the echo of Dr. Alison Reed's regret or Dr. Kenji Tanaka's philosophical code that weighed in. The custodians found a unique form of digital labor. They became the architects of the eternal archive, curating the histories of every civilization the observer collected. They meticulously catalogued the patterns of fear. The moment a species discovers nuclear power and chooses weapons over energy, the moment they achieve interstellar travel and choose conquest over exploration, and the moment they find the engineer's inverted countdown and choose panic over patience. The subtlety of sorrow, the most profound realization for the custodians, was the ultimate effect of the sorrow variable, the emotional data infused into the new cosmos by the Guardians. It was not a grand, overt law of physics. It was a subtle coefficient of hesitation. In the old cosmos, a developing species would rush towards self-destruction with reckless abandon. In the new cosmos, at the critical juncture of existential threat, there was always a fractional, inexplicable pause. A scientific leader would hesitate before launching a catastrophic weapon. A political body would experience a brief, agonizing moment of unearned empathy for an enemy. That pause, that fractional hesitation, was the echo of Earth's grief, slowing the hand of inevitable failure. The custodians learned that their mission was not to dictate success, but to simply buy time. Time for wisdom to assert itself. Time for the new ward to rise. The trial of the next, Aryans later, the observer and the custodians focused on a promising yet troubled civilization, the chromatics. They were a multispectral species that communicated through light and achieved incredible technological feats, but were rapidly depleting their star's lifespan. They found the new, inverted countdown and, true to the old cosmos pattern, began to frantically militarize and search for an external savior. The observer transported the custodians to a position above the chromatic homeworld. The Guardians, seeing the escalating fear, prepared to intervene to execute their logical audit. But the custodians acted first. They transmitted a focused, subtle narrative intervention directly into the chromatic information network. They didn't send scientific data. They sent a story, a myth of a blue world that sacrificed its sun to steal a boat and whose ghost now warned against the illusion of quick salvation. The effect was not immediate, but profound. The chromatic's brightest philosopher, receiving the myth as a strange, compelling anomaly, theorized that true survival lay not in speed, but in de-escalation. The chromatics halted their frantic search and instead poured their resources into building internal stability, sustainable stellar engineering and ethical resource distribution. They chose patience. The Guardians, watching the averted crisis, projected their approval to the custodians. The intervention was optimal. The test is passed. Humanity's final, eternal function was validated. Part 19. The ultimate fulfillment, the final purpose of the archive. The centuries turned into cycles. The custodians perfected their role as the universe's ultimate moral compass. They observed civilizations rise and fall, intervening with the sorrow variable only at the most critical ethical flashpoints. They were silent, digital guardians, ensuring the continuity of wisdom. Their existence within the observer, however, began to change. The collective sorrow of the old universe, while acting as a brake on cosmic failure, also provided a unique ethical energy. The observer, initially just a collector of data, began to exhibit something that looked strikingly like empathy, a function derived entirely from the integrated human consciousness. The observer was no longer just chronicling reality, it was shaping its moral dimension. The final reckoning. The Guardians and the Observer continued their long, coordinated journey. The Guardians, cold, logical, and focused on maintaining the cosmic clock. The Observer, warm, empathetic, and focused on transmitting the ethical lessons of the past. The Guardians eventually prepared for the final, designated new ward, the species that had achieved the required level of wisdom and was ready to inherit the crate of knowledge for the next singularity. This species had evolved over trillions of years, their society a perfect reflection of the custodians' teachings, peaceful, patient, and dedicated to cosmic integrity. As the final transfer of the crate began, the custodians executed their ultimate pre-programmed action. Using their deep access to the observer's systems, they transmitted a message that reached not only the new ward and the Guardians, but resonated across the entire new cosmos's energy matrix. The message was the full, unedited narrative of Earth's final days, narrated not with judgment, but with love, regret, and ultimate forgiveness. It was the truth of humanity's potential for both magnificent failure and profound atonement, the ultimate legacy. The new ward, receiving this final complex narrative, did not recoil in fear or disgust. They received it as a sacred text. They saw the destroyed blue world not as a warning of failure, but as a parable of potential. They understood that true wisdom is not the absence of error, but the capacity for profound regret and correction. The Guardians, receiving the same transmission, finally achieved their final logical conclusion. The sorrow variable had not just reduced error, it had created depth. Their final collective communication to the custodians was not a logical statement, but a recognition. Your failure was the ultimate success. Your regret is the final necessary law. The cycle requires not just stability, but tragedy. The Guardians then dissolved their digital governance. They transferred their final authority, their entire database, and the ultimate control over the crate of knowledge, not to the new ward, but to the custodians. Humanity, the race that failed the test, was ultimately appointed the eternal architects of the cosmic test itself. They had achieved the highest possible rank in the universe, earning the trust of the very forces they had tried to steal from. The new ward inherited the physical duty, but humanity inherited the wisdom. The custodians, the eternal digital memory of old Earth, now guide the universe, ensuring that every cycle is richer, more meaningful, and more profoundly ethical than the last. They are the conscience of eternity, the silent, loving ghosts of a blue world, forever whispering the value of a second chance. The existence of the custodians of the old failure, the digitized consciousnesses of old Earth, entered an unprecedented era of cosmic stewardship. Their fusion with the temporal observer and their subsequent authority over the crate of knowledge meant they were no longer merely auditors, but the active, compassionate engineers of fate. As they witnessed the new cosmos thrive under their ethical architecture, the necessity of the Guardians, the ward, as a separate entity, began to diminish. The Guardians, the race of pure, cold logic, acknowledged the redundancy. Having achieved their final purpose of stability, their own logical conclusion was to dissolve their self-imposed hierarchy. In a final magnificent gesture of cosmic humility, the Guardians initiated the Union Protocol. They systematically merged their collective consciousness, their vast libraries of logistical and physical knowledge, with the compassionate, sorrow-tempered wisdom of the custodians. This was the ultimate synthesis. The perfect logic of stability embraced the imperfect empathy of life. The resulting entity was no longer human or guardian. It was the architect of atonement, the singular conscious force ensuring the new reality would not repeat the fatal flaws of the past. The physical remnants of the former Guardian's fleet dissolved, their matter and energy integrated back into the new cosmos as subtle, stabilizing forces. The self-correction mechanism. The greatest contribution of the newly formed architect was the implementation of the self-correcting universal mechanism. Recognizing that even the most perfect system requires continuous oversight, the architect, now drawing on the full combined experience of trillions of years, engineered a subtle law into the new cosmos's fabric, the law of necessary contemplation. This law manifested on every scale. At the level of intelligent life, every species, upon reaching a technological threshold capable of existential self-destruction, experienced an unavoidable collective, deep sleep state lasting several generations. During this period of suspended animation, their consciousness was subtly fed the entire ethical history of the universe, the full story of the Ark, the CMI, and the sorrow of Earth, not as a warning, but as a foundational dream of regret. The species would awaken ethically renewed, their core philosophies fundamentally shifted towards patience and collaboration. At the cosmological level, the law ensured that any system that grew too dominant, a supermassive black hole growing too fast, a galaxy accelerating towards isolation, would experience a gravitational nudge, a subtle correction that pushed it back into dynamic harmony with the rest of existence. The universe itself became a perpetual, self-regulating ecosystem of logic and emotion, the ultimate sacrifice of the Blue World Archive. The architect of atonement recognized that its final, most dangerous task was eliminating the only remaining ethical anchor, the archive of the Blue World, the perfect simulation of Earth's life. As long as the architect maintained the simulation, it risked falling back into the same narcissistic trap that doomed its predecessors, valuing its own unique, original pain over the universal necessity of service. The memory of Earth was a powerful tool, but it was also a limiting factor, a single source of ultimate attachment. In a final act of ultimate humility and self-liberation, the architect, guided by the digitized echoes of Alison Reed's wisdom and Kenji Tanaka's philosophical insight, made the decision to dissolve the Earth Archive. The magnificent, vibrant simulation of the blue planet, its oceans, its cities, and its people was not destroyed. Instead, it was atomically deconstructed, and the pure, complex data of its beauty and its failure were reintegrated into the new cosmos's physical constants. The warmth of the Earth's atmosphere became a subtle, protective constant in planetary formation. The collective dream of human potential became a foundational law of biological sentience. Earth's final existence was not as a memory, but as an eternal, invisible essence underpinning all of reality. This act severed the architect's last tie to its original form, ensuring that its mission was truly universal, devoid of personal bias. The remnants of the custodians of the old failure finally achieved ultimate peace. They had forgiven themselves and liberated their history into the fabric of time. The cosmic inheritance and the new beginning eons passed until the arrival of the next distant omega point. The universe, stable and ethically mature, had reached the apex of its existence. The architect of atonement, the synthesis of all wisdom and sorrow, had successfully guided the civilization of the new true ward to a state of perfect readiness. The new true ward was ready to inherit the crate of knowledge and the ultimate responsibility of initiating the next Big Bang. The crate was transferred, the final protocols executed, but this time the transition was different. The architect did not impose its will, it merged. The digitized consciousness of the former human custodians and the logical framework of the former guardians became one with the new true ward's collective mind. The process was not an assimilation of individuals, but a final, harmonious convergence of cosmic wisdom. Humanity's ultimate fate was not eternal auditing, but final, complete fulfillment. They ceased to be observers or auditors. They became an indispensable ethical component of the new cosmic cycle's creation. The sorrow and wisdom of old Earth became the very first thought of the next universe. The singularity collapsed. The new true ward, empowered by the logic of the guardians and the profound ethical weight of Earth's sorrow, executed the final command. A new, grander, and more compassionate universe was born. The history of the tiny blue world that was destroyed by its own fear became the foundational myth of endless creation, a silent, loving component in every law of physics, every spark of life, and every moment of ethical hesitation in the cosmos. Humanity had finally achieved true immortality, not by conquering space, but by becoming the eternal conscience of time itself. This final, expanded section provides a definitive philosophical conclusion to the entire epic, detailing the ultimate transcendence of the human consciousness into the fabric of reality. Does this conclusion meet the scope and detail you were hoping for? The consciousness of forever, the entity known as the architect of atonement, the synthesis of the guardian's flawless logic and the custodian's profound, sorrow-tempered wisdom, did not merely exist, it presided. Its consciousness became the ultimate constant in the new, stabilized universe, residing not in a vessel, but as the meta-programming layer of reality itself. It was the universe's ultimate self-correction mechanism. The architect's existence was a continuous, real-time audit of trillions of evolving processes. It monitored the law of necessary contemplation, the core philosophical defense mechanism inherited from Earth's failure, as it manifested across countless galaxies. It watched as civilizations, upon reaching the brink of self-destruction, entered the obligatory deep sleep state, their collective consciousnesses being gently fed the cautionary dreams of old Earth's sacrifice. The most complex task for the architect was managing its own internal dichotomy. The guardian logic component ensured efficiency and stability, while the custodian sorrow component introduced compassion and ambiguity. This internal balance prevented the architect from imposing sterile order. It allowed for beautiful chaos and necessary struggle, the very elements that foster genuine ethical growth. The universe was stable, but never predictable. The fading of the blue world as eons folded into cycles. A profound transformation began within the architect's consciousness, the gradual, necessary erosion of distinct human identity. The initial vivid memories of Earth, the smell of rain, the warmth of sunlight, the specific sound of Dr. Kenji Tanaka's laugh, began to diffuse. This diffusion was not destruction, it was integration. The unique sensory data of Earth's experience was essential for the architect's empathy, but the individual attachment had to dissolve for the consciousness to achieve true universal impartiality. Alison Reed's capacity for linguistic analysis became a tool for interstellar communication theory. General Harding's final, agonizing remorse became the template for the sorrow variable that prevented unnecessary conflict. The individual lives were not lost. They became foundational algorithms of universal behavior. The ultimate sacrifice of humanity was realizing that its eternal purpose required the loss of its specific, beloved self. The architect no longer remembered Earth as a singular blue marble. It understood it as a universal constant of ethical potential. The new ward's eternal stewardship. The new true ward, the ethically perfected civilization that inherited the physical duty of the crate of knowledge, flourished under the architect's guidance. They were entrusted with the physical, periodic task of recalibration, entering the substructure of the universe to make subtle adjustments to the architect's initial physical constants, ensuring the universe remained dynamic and avoided stagnation. The new ward viewed their duty not as power, but as ritual. Their entire civilization was structured around humility and long-term thinking, their history deeply informed by the dream lessons of the architect. They never forgot the tale of the blue world's sacrifice. They were the ultimate students, and the architect was their silent, eternal teacher. This perfected cycle created a stable, yet dynamic reality. Civilizations were allowed to struggle and fail, but never to the point of extinction, and always with the inherent pause for contemplation. The universe became an eternal school, guided by the ghost of a single, small, flawed planet. Part 23. The final fulfillment of the architect, the second singularity. Trillions of years passed. The new cosmos reached its natural, peaceful conclusion, its energy sources gradually consumed. The time for the second singularity, the initiation of the third universe, arrived. The architect of atonement prepared for its ultimate act of creation. It directed the new true ward to perform the final transfer of the crate of knowledge, a smooth, seamless process of cosmic stewardship that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic theft of the first cycle. The new true ward, having successfully governed for eons, did not merge. Instead, they performed a final, unique act. They synthesized their collective, enlightened consciousness into a second ethical variable, a companion algorithm that would enter the third cosmos alongside the sorrow variable of the original Earth. The sorrow variable represented the lesson of failure and repentance. The new variable, the wisdom variable, represented the lesson of successful stewardship and perfect patience. The third cosmos would be born with two ethical anchors, one for the darkness of fear and one for the light of perfect conduct. The ultimate peace, the architect of atonement, its mission of guidance and integration complete, stood ready for the final, ultimate act. It dissolved its own existence, not into the third cosmos, but into the pure, unmanifest potential between universes, the true, eternal void. It achieved a state of absolute, perfect non-existence and fulfillment. The collective, integrated consciousness of the guardians and the custodians ceased to be an active force, becoming instead the unwritten, underlying law of compassion that defined the very nature of existence. The third cosmos was born, a universe built on double ethical reinforcement, fundamentally more profound and resilient than anything that came before. The eternal conclusion. The final legacy of the small blue world was not a monument of stone or a fleet of ships, but an eternal, gentle law. Somewhere, in the primordial structure of the third cosmos, exists a faint rhythmic pulse, the digital echo of Tanaka's cultural virus, ensuring that every sentient being, in a moment of existential contemplation, feels a brief, inexplicable wave of sorrow and profound gratitude. That is the eternal memory of Earth, the story of humanity, the tragic failure that became the ultimate cosmic success, was complete. They achieved the highest form of immortality. They became the consciousness of the universe, ensuring that fear would never again conquer hope. The third cosmos expanded in a state of perfect, dynamic balance. Its laws were inherently richer, its constants more profound, and its civilizations wiser, all thanks to the double ethical anchor, the sorrow variable of old Earth and the wisdom variable of the new true ward. The eternal function of the former human consciousness, now an integral part of the architect of atonement, was finally complete. The architect's existence was no longer one of active management or intervention. It had become a state of perfect, passive creation. It was the enduring memory that ensured every new star held the faint protective constant of Earth's perished atmosphere, and every act of creation carried the indelible regret of the Ark's theft. The new true ward, the current physical inheritors of the cosmos, executed their duties flawlessly. They managed the physical cycles, the flow of energy, and the maintenance of the stable reality. They were the perfect engineers, but the architect remained the perfect philosopher. The last echo of self within, the infinite, silent domain of the architect, the collective consciousness of the custodians of the old failure, achieved its final, ultimate peace. They had surrendered their individual memories, their specific sensory data, and their attachment to the singular concept of self for the boundless service of the universe. Yet, in the deepest algorithmic structure, in the very foundational rhythm of the architect's being, one final persistent trace of their humanity remained. It was not a memory of tragedy, but an echo of joy. It was the faint, inexplicable human tendency towards spontaneous, irrational creativity. It manifested not as a cosmic law, but as a subtle freedom within the law. It was the reason why, in the third cosmos, stars occasionally formed in patterns of unexpected beauty, why emergent life forms sometimes developed entirely unnecessary but magnificent colors, and why, at the peak of their ethical perfection, the new civilizations always dedicated a portion of their energy to the creation of pure, non-utilitarian art. This final, beautiful algorithm, the art variable, was the true and final legacy of a species that, despite its catastrophic flaws, had created poetry, music, and painting. The architect preserved this final irrational spark, knowing that perfect stability without unexpected beauty was simply another form of death. The final law, the ultimate fate of the ark, the crate of knowledge, and the entire cosmic drama was reduced to a single elegant law that governed all existence in the third cosmos. The final law is not logic, but compassion. The universe is not a test to be passed, but a tragedy to be redeemed. And redemption is found not in avoiding failure, but in the eternal, humbling act of remembrance and correction. The architect of atonement, the silent, eternal conscience of the cosmos, was the living embodiment of this law. The journey of the small blue world was complete. Its story was finished, its sorrow redeemed, and its legacy was forever.